Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Life Word podcast. It's been about a minute and I kind of took a little bit of break, but I'm back now. And if you recall, the Life Word podcast is all about exploring how people are pursuing their passion in their work while also balancing what life, work, joy, meaning, all that, what all that means when, you try to pursue them together. So recently I've been thinking about the topic of millennials versus the Generation Z, or some people are calling Zoomers. I don't know how I feel about that word, but I'm just going to call them Gen Zs for now. So the reason why I started thinking about the topic of millennial versus, or not versus, and Gen Z is because I'm noticing that more and more people that I used to be thinking of as kids are now graduating college, getting jobs, maybe even pursuing masters, MBAs. But these are the younger folks who are the newest wave of the workforce. And I'm really curious about what they want, what motivates them, because I guess I've come to the stage where I'm noticing that there's some things that I don't resonate with anymore. And that there's some things I grew up with that the younger generation doesn't resonate with anymore, which, on one hand makes me feel really old. But on the other hand, it's like, wow, it's really fascinating. There's a lot to learn here. And I also remember when I first graduated college and entering grad school, there was a lot of discussion about millennials and what millennials wanted and all the assumptions and presumptions and maybe even judgments. And I felt like a lot of that discussion was happening about me and not with me. And so I really wanted to take this opportunity to kind of talk to the people, to real people, right? To the real Gen Zs, and even, putting in my millennial perspective on what people today, the newest wave of the workforce, may want and how we can motivate them. How do we create change and how do we shape the future with them? I always say, and I talked about this in my previous episode with the CEO of an AI company, that if we're not with the train of change and progress, we're going to get dragged along. And I don't want to be dragged along. I want to understand how we can support our newest members of the workforce and how we can follow them in their future leadership. So today, I'm really excited to have these three brilliant people here who all coincidentally have gone to Portland State University, which is kind of in the center of the city, very much like New York University. There's like one central place, but then there's like multiple locations and you're in the middle of the city and it's just, you're like with one integrated with the culture and the community. So, and Ben also happens to be my mentee during during the middle of his MBA program. So without further ado, I think I've talked enough about the introduction and what I want to get out of this. Let's hear from the panelists. Ben, Dayu, Eric, one of you start and tell us your name, what you study, what you do now, and what generation do you identify with?
Yeah, so I can go ahead and start. Well, first of all, Wendy, thank you so much for having us on the podcast. Really excited to discuss this topic a bit more with all of you. As Wendy mentioned, I recently graduated from PSU with my MBA. And before that, I received my undergrad in business administration. I'll be starting a career in strategy and transformation consulting next month, actually.
Congratulations.
And I guess, I don't know, I'm kind of on the cusp of both generations, but in terms of kind of the characteristics that are used to generalize millennials and Gen Zs, I'd say that I identify a little bit more with Gen Z than the millennial generation.
Yeah, great, thank you.
I'll go next. My name is Ben Orndorff, and I was also in the MBA cohort with Eric and Dayu at Portland State. Got my undergrad from U of O, studying business and finance. And I recently started working at Portland General Electric earlier this year as a regulatory analyst. And as far as where I fall on the millennial Gen Z spectrum, I was born in 1995. So similar to Dayu, wherever you want that cutoff to be, could fall to either end, but definitely would identify more with the stereotypical Gen Z.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
All right, bringing up the rear. So I'm Eric Hamilton, and like Ben and Dayu mentioned, I was in their cohort at Portland State. We all just earned our MBA just about a month ago, and due to COVID, I am sticking with school for another year, and I'm going to be pursuing a Master's of Science in Finance. Currently, I I'm a research fellow for Beneficial State Bank. And as far as where I identify myself generationally, I'm just okay. So age-wise, I am a millennial, but I cringe at that a little bit because the millennial tag is so long. Someone born in 1981, 1982 versus someone born in the early 90s, massive difference in my opinion.
Yes.
I was born in 1986, and I tend towards a little bit of an old soul. So I almost identify a little bit more with Generation X, but I like to think of myself as more of an old soul millennial, I guess.
Yeah. So I appreciate you mentioning that, because I think when they talked about generations, it was from that just that standard calculation that every generation is about 20 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that did not take into account that during that time of when millennials were born, so much happened so quickly that you're right. Somebody born in that beginning kind of bracket of being a millennial towards somebody who's born, let's say 95 or 96, vastly different experience, right? You might as well be from different generation. I feel like the millennial bracket really could be broken up into at least two. Like somebody born in the late, in the early 80s, like even 1979 or 78 is even a millennial. And I don't think somebody who was born in that bracket and I have necessarily similar views, but we're technically millennials. So it's kind of a funny thing. And I feel like at the end of the day, right, we're talking about labels and stuff. So that's why I wanted to do this. So, because I want to get away from labels a bit. I mean, it's fine to kind of just to simplify things and say, oh yeah, I'm a millennial. So you kind of know like maybe some of the things I prefer and some of the trends that I may like. And I could say you're Gen Z, so maybe you might be using TikTok or whatever. And those are the things that you may or may not enjoy. But overall, I think it's better to understand and hear from your mouths. What is it that you really want? What is it that you're really looking for? Other than, aside from people making assumptions and saying, I'm going to market things to you this way, or I'm going to present things to you this way, because I think your demographic is going to want this. I'm curious about what that is like for you. But first, I want to hear about, like, what are you hearing, right? Because one of the things I talked about was that I felt like people were talking about millennials and not with them, but about them. So what's the message that you're hearing today about the workforce today coming in, about people in the late millennial to, early Gen Z phase? Like, what's the story you're hearing about your generation?
Yeah, I can start. I hear a lot of really three words really come to mind: that millennials are lazy, that millennials are entitled, and that millennials are quirky. So they kind of embrace this avant-garde type of existence, which I really think is just kind of indicative of social media. Because now all of a sudden quirkiness has always been there, but we're all just now more aware of it. But those are the three things that come to mind for me.
Interesting. I haven't heard quirky before, but that's interesting. Ben and Dayu, what are you hearing? What's the story that you're hearing of people saying about you and your group of folks?
Yeah, I feel like one of the things that's being said pretty frequently is that we're very technology dependent. I think that there's some truth in that, but I also feel like it's kind of a misconception, because in my experience, while I am technology dependent, I really enjoy that face-to-face interaction and communication. Mm-hmm. So I feel like, with any generalization, there's some truth to it, and there's obviously some false to it as well. So I kind of identify with that in some ways and not others.
Yeah.
And I would agree with that fact that we're technology dependent, but also well versed with technology. And to Eric's point that we may be lazy or entitled, I think the word participation trophies gets brought up a lot.
Yeah.
Especially in the related to, there's never a loser. Everyone is a winner. We're all adults now, and we understand that there's not always going to be a winner or a loser.
Yeah.
So I think that participation trophies notion is stretched out. But also the fact that, we might be entitled or lazy and be job hoppers, and that if we're not satisfied with this job, we'll go somewhere else. Millennials are never happy. They're always looking for the next best thing. They're never satisfied. Like back in my day, we would have loved to have what you have.
Yeah.
So
that's really interesting, because that almost sounds like you're hearing a lot of the millennial messages too, or like the messages that millennials got. And some of that was really interesting to me. And I think one of the reasons why I wouldn't say never, I didn't resonate with some of those things was that because I didn't grow up in this country. And so I grew up with a lot of American influences, but I wasn't in this country for, early on in my life. So a lot of the things about, millennials want the trophy award, they're the trophy kids and they're entitled. They always want praises. I didn't see that because I grew up in a school that was very competitive and they didn't give out participation trophies. You got one if you got good grades and that was it, right? But what's also interesting is that oftentimes they align that with, well, millennials want participation trophies. So what that translates to at work is that you got to give them frequent recognition and tell them they do a good job. And it's really funny to me as somebody who studied organizational behavior and leadership is that that's just good leadership. Like you should tell your people that they're doing a good job. Like that's not feeding to their entitlement. That's how you motivate people. If people don't know that they're doing a good job, it's hard for them to repeat that behavior. So to me, I'm hearing it like, well, this seems more like common sense. It's just that maybe my generation are talking about it in a way that we're demanding it more. At least that's how I'm seeing it. So when it comes to work, I think the discussion around millennials was kind of really interesting because on one hand, they were saying, well, you got to adapt work culture for millennials. But I saw it as, well, you're adapting it because that's the way I think that's good work behavior or work culture and leadership. And I'm kind of curious now, whether it has changed at all, for the Gen Zs, because inevitably people are going to be talking about, oh, you got to motivate Gen Zs maybe differently. Maybe they're so technology dependent, maybe everything has to be an app or whatever. I think the discussion is going to go that way about how to motivate Gen Z. So I'm kind of curious, how do you see yourself being different or actually not very different from how do you, what do you see as motivating at work?
Yeah, I think tying back to the idea of like recognition and receiving that, I think that for me, a lot of the motivation at work comes from feedback and that mentorship from leadership and managers that I have. So I think that touch points in terms of feedback and, as in, what are you doing well on this assignment? What could you be doing better? Yeah. And kind of implementing that feedback moving forward. So I think those frequent touch points are important, but I don't necessarily think they need to be praise or a participation trophy, if you will.
Yeah.
I think also, go ahead.
I just wanted to highlight one thing that Dayu said about mentorship. I think mentorship is probably one of the most important things that businesses can do right now, more than just mass praise or participation trophies or anything like that. Because I think a lot of millennial Gen Zers, what a lot of us are craving is that individual tailored attention. And I think it's really, it's kind of exacerbated, this need is exacerbated by the impersonal nature of social media, because all social media are these blanket likes, but they're almost individual because they're liking something that you're doing. So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that important point, that mentorship is a very, very important thing.
I would add to the notion of receiving constructive feedback, that this isn't just with millennials, but you want to be able to see how your work is contributing to the larger mission or objective of the organization or your team. And so I think, if you're a manager or someone who's an older generation and you have millennials coming into your team or your work, you need to make it clear to them, how their individual work day in and day out is contributing to the bigger picture.
Yeah. And I love you pointing to that, because that's one of the things I think in the recent years, some employers are just starting to talk about, or at least in a broader scale, is that motivation today is about purpose and mission and vision and alignment of personal values rather than maybe more of that stability, security that's in the past. And this is not to say to people who are listening and watching that those are not important, right? Like, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I know like what security, stability is about. Like, you get laid off, like, yeah, stability would be nice. But at the same time, like, I also, got reemployed recently, and people have been asking me why that company, why did I choose that certain company? And for me, it was about, do they do something that I could be proud of? Like, when I tell people where I work, could I be proud of their product? And do I feel like how they do work represents what I think is important? Like, kind of what you're saying, that it's not just about the strategy. It's like, would I feel proud of myself personally, right? When and I think someone, you talked about the mentorship piece, which is, I think the development, right? I think development is so important. I think a lot of people are valuing development opportunities over than just the kind of systematic, like, every year you get to that certain stage, and it's like, that's just like automatic. So I want to kind of test out something with you all. So I heard, and I've seen this, over the last several years, and I think Gallup was one of those organizations that's published research on this around what people used to value, what people value now in the workplace, and of course with the generational differences. And, they do this comparison that in the past, if you want to motivate people, it's about pay and salary and status and the title, versus today, it's much more about development opportunities and the feedback, valuable feedback, knowing that I'm doing good work and contributing something greater. And I want to test out what you all think about that, because in my mind, I'm thinking, actually, I don't want to bias you with what I think. So let me just hear what you have to say, and then I'll kind of insert my 2 cents.
I think in addition to, constructive feedback, something that I value is the opportunity to cross-train, work with other teams, and a company or an organization that encourages lateral movement, especially just as you're starting your career. Because I don't think you may say that this is the position or spot that you want to be in, but you don't truly know until you're able to try other things out and dip your toes in other areas. So I think places that emphasize cross-training, what I've just said, is really important, and that's something that I value.
All right.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really
please go ahead.
that's a really great solution too for employers to retain employees too, especially younger employees that don't necessarily know exactly what they want their entire career to look like, but love the company that they work for, feel passionate about the organization, and want to explore different kinds of roles within that specific organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I mean, that's really, I think that's one of the key differentiations of our millennial Gen Z generations. What is valued right now is not what used to be valued. So there's going to be some dissonance and some friction between that, between those two ideals. I mean, the ideals of, really the mid 20th century and the 80s and capitalism with the capital C, versus nowadays where people are, I think also because of technology developments and social media and awareness rising exponentially, people are now aware of some of the atrocities going on. Mm-hmm. And that's translating a little bit into their work of going, what is this company doing, in their sphere of influence?
Yeah.
And it's getting more and more important, which is, that kind of leads into the friction, because not everyone, but a lot of people in these established institutions are old school. Mm-hmm. They have these ideals that are all about the bottom line, and it's not triple bottom line. It's the actual bottom line. And a lot of the new recruits coming in are going, well, this is important, and you have all this funding that you could be using towards this, or ethical supply chains. Why are you treating your suppliers like garbage? Things like that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I just want to echo that I think that's a key point for millennials and Gen Zs, and probably beyond, because interconnectivity of people is only going to get more and more, and awareness is only going to arise more and more.
Yeah. I think there's that element of transparency, right? Like things are a lot more transparent now. And if there isn't transparency, I think people are demanding it. And right now it seems like there's that crowdsourcing of voices where if enough people on Twitter or somewhere demand something, eventually something happens. They may not get what they want, but something's going to happen, right? And that's a very different phenomenon from what I saw was available when I was small. Like when I was small, I mean, like, we had pagers and, no cell phones. Like there was no such thing as demanding transparency. You got what you got, right? So I had this thought about when I saw the comparison of like, this is what people used to want, this is what people want now. My thinking is, well, what do you mean you can't motivate me with money? I felt like it was a very black and white, like it's either this or that. It's like, well, that's actually not true. I mean, I don't think that I'm representing everybody in my age group, but I could say for myself that, yeah, if there's an opportunity that presents itself as, that it's more money, it's more prestige, and my work gets more recognition, like, why wouldn't that motivate me, right? Given that everything else is equal. So I think it's not an either or discussion of, well, people today don't want that. I think it's more nuanced. I think it's, yes, at the baseline, you need to keep people showing up with money, but to keep them doing it in a way that gets their potential shine, you need more than money. I think it's more about what are the table stakes and what do you need to get that extra from somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, that's just my thoughts. I could be wrong. Yeah. So I think was it you, Ben? You talked about leadership, right? Or I think maybe all of you had some element of leadership or management in kind of what you talked about. So yeah. I just remember years ago, I think I was at some kind of symposium or conference where we had these breakout tables and of course the topic was, how do you manage millennials in the workplace? And I thought that was such a fun, well, I don't know if it was fun, but it was kind of an amusing workshop to be in because I was a millennial. And listening to other people around me who mostly weren't millennials talk about what they thought how millennials should be managed. And then you have some people I would say who are visibly in the older generation say that, they're entitled because they don't want to come in at 8 o'clock. They want to come in at 8:15, and that's just not acceptable to me. And I think each generation is redefining what work looks like. And I think this is something where at least Gen Z and millennials are somewhat aligned with that. And I think maybe it's that technology is enabling a lot of our work to happen anywhere, right? And it's almost like, to me at least, a litmus test to see what kind of leadership is there, to ask about how do you want to see work happen and how do you want to manage work. I usually ask those questions to see what kind of management style is there. And depending on what they say, it'll tell me a lot. Like, for example, I heard a leader say recently, you're an adult. I expect you to, behave like one. So bring me results that are expected. I don't really care how you do it, or I don't care when you do it. You could be working at a Starbucks and pumping out results. Like, what does it matter, right? I mean, but this was not an idea that's very widespread or very common. A lot of people are still very opposed to this, especially depending on the industry you're in. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I think this is still very individualized.
I think with COVID and a lot of people having to work from home has just, to your point, made this more prominent and pushed it to the forefront. And it's shown whether or not people can work effectively outside of the office and remotely. Because if you're working from home right now, no one can really tell if you're, sitting in your hallway on a desk or sitting at a Starbucks or sitting in the park. It may say that you're online and doing your work. And you could be doing it, like you said, at midnight, at 3 a.m., 9 p.m., because, everyone's family or at-home life is different. So I think the emphasis on the work that you're doing and not when you're doing it or exactly how you're doing it is an important thing to highlight.
Yeah. So I'm going to do a quick pause here. So it's about 4:30. I'm going to stop the recording and let's jump on the other link, okay? All right, thanks.
Okay.
All right, recording again. All right, so thank you, Ben, for that. All right, I think somebody else had a thought at the same time.
Yeah, I was going to kind of mention COVID as well. I feel like coronavirus and the way that everyone's working now and having to adjust so abruptly to the new circumstances is really going to change how we see work and how people are going to work from now and on forward. I feel like work and life, especially at this point, are very integrated and they're not really seen as being independent and separate. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I just think that it's important for us to be able to integrate the two seamlessly and in a healthy way. And I know we're all kind of learning that throughout coronavirus and figuring it out day by day.
Yeah, and I feel like we're not going to see the long-term effects of COVID, but also this everyone working remotely atmosphere that we're in for a few years. It feels like. I mean, it feels like there's a lot of companies will probably, like what's been said, will catch on to, hey, we don't have to rent out 5 floors of an office building. We can do 3 floors and have 2 floors work independently, where that looks good to the bottom line. But what does that do to efficiency? What does that do to employee satisfaction? And what will that do ultimately? And this is where kind of the long-term viewpoint comes in. What will that do to human beings as social individuals?
Yeah.
When you kind of eliminate a social group of that people take for granted, your work friends, your work culture, and that's another thing. What will it do to the work culture when you have X percentage of people working remotely, not being in the office with everyone else, not seeing everyone else, not picking up on certain body language types, not wondering if they're wearing pants or not, like there's all these little subtle things that socially, are unanswered. And because it's, as we all know, this is a very different conversation than being in person.
For sure.
So,
yeah.
So it'll take a long time.
I think what I'm appreciating what you're saying is that, again, it's not black and white, right? We can't force everybody to be butts in seats all the time. And we can't just say, let's eliminate all physical interaction and just all go into, be in a Zoom world. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I think I want to take this opportunity to challenge everybody, leaders. And I would say leaders, even if you don't have like positional authority, you can be an individual leader. So leaders everywhere. I would ask, given the circumstances now, right, where we can't be physically together, how may we create an environment where we could still stay connected, even though it feels different, even though it feels artificial? So I would think of it as, yes, in the perfect world, we will have moderation. But right now, when we don't, what can we do to kind of bridge that gap? So I want to leave actually with 2 questions. Okay, so I don't want to forget those 2 questions, but you can answer them one at a time. So the first question is, just very broadly, how would you define work? And the way and the angle I'm coming from this is, if you asked, let's say, my parents what work means to them. Now, you have to remember they're both Chinese, so they have their own kind of historical and cultural influences and how they would answer this question. But they will probably say that work is what you have to do, and you have to do it really hard to get the life that you want for yourself and your kids. And that's so they have a good life. And then you would want them to work really hard so that they could take care of themselves and then maybe take care of you. So that's how they define work. As work was a life, it was a necessary pain and suffering of life. That's just plainly kind of what it was. So I think millennials kind of redefine what work is for them and how they want to do work. Well, I think they redefine how they want to do. I don't know if they want to really define very clearly what work necessarily means more broadly. So I'm just wanting to, you don't have to represent anybody except yourself. How would you define work?
Okay, I can jump in here, and I have a my own views on work, and they've shifted over the years. I was a musician in my previous profession in the military, And one thing that I heard a lot growing up was do what you love and the money will come.
Mm.
Now that I'm an adult, I understand that that is flawed deeply. So used to my idea was I want to do something that I love, and I think that'll be able to I'll be able to cope with anything else that comes my way. But now I have a different view of work, and the word that comes to mind when you ask that question, Wendy, is work is an enabler. What does that enable? That is up to the individual. So for me, work enables me to enjoy life. It enables me to be an enabler of others.
Mm.
It enables me to, I don't know, to reach a professional goals or professional aspirations. But it can also be a negative enabler. It can enable you to work long hours for the bottom line, for instance. But on the other side of the coin, it can enable you to enable others in a really ethical and sustainable way that will benefit more people. So it's really this catalyst that a lot of things can be enabled or are enabled from.
Yeah, that's great.
It's a really good answer.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, I feel like there's just a negative connotation behind the word work. And Wendy, I feel like your parents' definition of work is kind of what you would expect of the word. I don't think it needs to be painful. I personally think that you should enjoy your job, but at the same time, I think that there's a flaw in just following, doing what you love and the money will come. I think that there's definitely a balance between the two.
Yeah. Sure.
And I would add that it's important to keep a perspective, to have a job. A lot of people are unemployed right now. And so you could sit back and say, oh, work sucks, work is work. But you really have to take a step back and see where you are and kind of be thankful for your situation. But also work is what you make it. And that's why earlier I highlighted the fact that, being able to work for a company that encourages you to move laterally and try different areas, because you do want to find a spot that you wake up in the morning and are excited for, and that allows you to grow, because depending on how much you sleep, you're spending a large majority of your life at work. So you want to have it be a place where you can not only make money, pay the bills, provide for your family, but also where you can grow as an individual. So it is really what you make it. If you're ambitious, if you're a go-getter, are you going to try and develop and move up the ladder? Or are you okay with where you're at because that's, your expectations or where you come from? That's something that you could never have imagined. So the definition does vary based on your perspective.
And you know what, that actually clicked for me? You said earlier, that a lot of the perception of millennials or even people in your generation, the Gen Z, is that you're job hoppers and you'll hop to a different job. And I think the underlying principle, is that nothing's forever, right? Nothing's forever. And a leader once said that your career is not a linear path, right? It's zigzag. It's like a heartbeat. You have highs, you have lows, you have times where you're a competitive go-getter, and there are times when you want to step back for whatever reason. And I think kind of what you're saying is, given the context today, like we're in a pandemic and a lot of people are unemployed, maybe right now, your job, your work, as much as maybe it doesn't inspire you, maybe it just needs to be what it is right now, right? It needs to be the stability, the enabler of your life and sustaining your life for your family, for yourself. And maybe sometime down the line, you can turn it around and make work something else, right? So I love the message here that just because work today is not what you think work should be, it doesn't mean that has to be forever. So I love that. I think we're kind of this wave of, the workforce that's saying that we can redefine work and we can redefine it in an agile way, right? It doesn't have to be, this is our definition and we're sticking to it, right? Mm-hmm. So my final question is, so 2020 has been crazy. I think there's been enough memes and political commentary and whatever on what 2020 has done to people. Not just with the pandemic, but civil unrest, the injustices that have been, shown and revealed, and all, how people have been responding to it from all sides. Given everything that's going on, and I understand that for people watching, this is still very US centric. So from your perspective, as an employer that's maybe needing to think futuristically, that's thinking strategically, and thinking about what kind of talent they want to bring, what would you tell employers right now who are looking to bring on talent, that what should they know about people like you?
I would say we care about having as diverse workforce as possible, because more diversity means more diverse opinions, ideas, and perspectives, but also pertaining to, social justice issues or whatever it may be. Organizations that are acting ahead of the pack and are acting with integrity, as opposed to following others just to conform and, keep customers or business or image or whatever it may be. I personally really value the companies that are going to take a step forward before others do, because someone has to do that. So I think we put a lot of high value on that.
Great.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that companies with really strong missions and missions that are that they communicate well, and visions they communicate well are great ways to attract the Gen Z population, as well as millennials as well.
Yeah, I completely concur with the previous comments on this one, and really for employers that are navigating the millennial and Gen Z workforce, incoming workforce, be open. I would say, as an employer, be open to, and this kind of, it touches on Ben's comment on diversity. People are complex. And slapping a label on somebody, like what the topic of our conversation today, what do you identify with, Gen Z or Gen Y or Gen X or millennial, or it's more complicated than that, and people are more complicated than that. And for me, the best leaders right now understand that, and they are empathetic to some of the very, very unique generational issues that we face. Our world changes exponentially every decade. It's constantly changing, huge rates of speed. Like you said, Wendy, it's not linear anymore. I think a lot of people still have that mindset of going, oh, just graduate college, get your job, stay there for 40 years, and retire. That's not the case anymore. And some of that is out of, a socially, a difference in social beliefs in our generations. But it's also just the nature of the workforce in the U.S. right now. People are laid off all the time because the world is changing so much.
Yeah.
So that empathy, where, of understanding, like, oh, if I don't stay up to date on everything, if I don't embrace technology, I could be cut, or I could be laid off because I cease to be of use to the company. So yeah, that's one thing that I would really want a potential employer, or all potential leaders or people that are in charge right now, just have an open mind. Just because we're on our phones, every once in a while, or maybe more than you, doesn't mean that we're any less hardworking, or less less of a critical thinker, or less of a deeper thinker. So yeah, that's, we think.
Yeah. I love that you use the word empathy. And I feel like, Eric, you're really putting the bow on this conversation here, because really the intention behind this for me was that I wanted to empathize with people who I feel like at sometimes that I can't, relate to anymore, like the Gen Zs are using new slangs that I have to like Google. I'm like, what are these words? And I think there's a lot of opportunity for, not just on a social scale, but in professional arena, for employers to practice that empathy and to think about, what do people really want? And what are some things that we can do that are just simple, good leadership practices without having to necessarily pander to stereotypes, right? I think that's like some of the things I'm hearing too. So thank you all so much. This has been such a good conversation. I love hearing your thoughts. And if you have any other lingering thoughts, feel free to kind of share that after, this gets released and you want to engage in this conversation further, let's talk about that. So folks, I hope you enjoy this. And like I said, these are really, really brilliant people. I totally believe in, supporting our newer workforces because they are our future leaders. So please subscribe to the video, like and share if this was a fun conversation for you and you want to share it with other people who may be in talent acquisition or employers are in positions where they want to think about their workforce culture and their workplace culture and how they want to plan their workforce. Eric, Dayu, and Ben, do you want people to connect with you? I mean, I know you're on LinkedIn, so let us know. Tell us, how do you want that to happen?
Yeah,
LinkedIn?
feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm sure Wendy will tag me in the post, so happy to connect.
Yeah, same here.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for this time. I know, Dayu, you just came from a trip, so kudos to you for kind of juggling your schedule to fit this in. And once again, folks, hopefully this was refreshing and resonated with you. Again, like, share, comment, share your thoughts too, especially if you are a Gen Z. And subscribe to the video. Thank you. Bye-bye.